Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I'm your host, Pete Fletzer, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Nick Milkey. And this episode is special because we were given a very special opportunity to have an early look at Star Wars Visions Volume 2, and also had the opportunity to speak to some of the executive producers, Jacqui Lopez, James Waugh, and Josh Rhimes. And so on this episode of Around the Galaxy, we're going to talk to you about how we felt, give sort of a review of Star Wars Visions Volume 2, as well as share with you some of the conversation we had with the people who brought it to life. Nick, what was your initial impression of Star Wars Visions Volume 2?
Honestly, I was blown away. I really enjoyed Visions Volume 1. It was something that anime was not really something I was familiar with. Right. And it was so neat to experience anime in the medium of Star Wars, which of course I'm very familiar with, and to get to see the wide-ranging styles that, you know, come from that medium. But Visions Volume 2 honestly took Volume 1 and blew it away, kind of took it to a next level. Like, I truly was engrossed from the very first episode all the way through the 9th episode, and it really grabbed me in a way even more so than Volume 1 did. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yeah, you know, I think I had a very similar response in that I was never an anime fan. I've, you know, I know it's a beautiful medium, and I know that the people who are fans of it are fully dedicated fans. And I wanted to give it a chance because it's Star Wars. And as a Star Wars fan, I thought maybe this would be my entree to anime. And while I enjoyed the stories, if I'm being completely honest, Volume 1, I don't think I've gone back and watched many of the episodes, maybe one or two more than once. Not that I didn't enjoy them. I enjoyed them, but they weren't necessarily for me. Whereas, as you're saying, and I couldn't agree with you more, the fact that we got 9 different styles of animation, I would say 1 or 2 more true anime episodes. And in fact, this time around, the anime episode grabbed me in a way that the other ones did not. But overall, I felt like this all 9 episodes, I wanted to watch them from beginning to end in one sitting. Whereas Visions Volume 1, I was like, I caught a couple. I'm going to go take a break. I'm going to come back and catch some more. So yeah, there was something about this one that worked. We did have the opportunity to ask Jacqui Lopez specifically about how they selected the studios that were involved in Volume 2. So let's hear what she had to say.
Hi, nice collection.
Hello.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yes,
thank you so much
you.
for taking the time with us today. I'll lead off. First of all, these 9 shorts are absolutely stunning, beautiful, top to bottom. So many different styles, which is really appealing, I think, for season 2 here. But if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about the process for selecting the studios that were involved this time around.
You know, I think when the decision was made to, you know, let's take this global, let's get some different perspectives on Star Wars. We were fans of animation. So we all had some studios that we wanted to consider and, you know, hope that they come along for the ride. You know, I think that Aardman and Cartoon Saloon were sort of givens for us. We're just huge fans of their work. And then some of the other, you know, some of the filmmakers that were involved were fans of or previous work from the studios. And then we just wanted to make sure it had a sort of a global representation. Mm-hmm. So it was difficult to get down to 9 that we could approach because there's so much fantastic work. But then when we approached those studios, we asked them if they would like to collaborate and be involved in this, and if they had a Star Wars story to tell. And so that was, you know, they came back to us then with their pitches, given, I don't want to say guidelines, but, you know, we just had conversations about sort of things that were important to us, things that we wanted that are important in Star Wars, but we really wanted their stories from their cultures. So when we got the pitches, you know, it was, then we, you know, curated what we felt were the strongest stories.
It's so interesting to see the approach, and that they really wanted to make sure they were sticking with a Star Wars story. That really means a lot, and it really comes through. Nick, there were 9 episodes, and 9 different studios. Tell us a little bit about the studios.
Absolutely. And that was so neat to hear her talk about the way they made those selections and the involvement and the excitement that these studios had to want to be involved. So like you mentioned, there are 9 episodes in this second volume of Visions. We have the first episode is from a studio called El Guiri, which is a Spanish studio. So automatically, and that's the neat thing about this. And if you're not aware, if you didn't see the press stuff that was announced about volume 2, it is 9 episodes, but it is 9 different countries. And I think that's what is so special. And we're going to hear from the producers about that in a few minutes. So El Guiri, which is a studio from Spain. There's a studio from Ireland called Cartoon Saloon, which did your favorite episode, Pete, that you're going to talk about in a little bit. There's a studio from Chile called Punk Robot Studio. Aardman Studio in the United Kingdom. Of course, everybody knows Aardman because that's Wallace and Gromit. That is a very, popular, and it gets away from the anime style because we get into claymation and stop motion and some other styles of, not just anime, but the medium. So that's really cool. There's a studio called Studio Mir, which is South Korea. They do an episode called Journey to the Dark Head. Studio La Cachette, which is in France. I hope I said that right. I'm not a perfect speaking Frenchman. Then an episode called The Spy Dancer. I'm excited to talk about that briefly here in just a second. My personal favorite was The Bandits of Golock, which was 88 Pictures, which is an Indian studio. There was a team-up episode, The Pit, which was Dart Shatahio and Lucasfilm Animation, and that was a partnership between a Japanese studio and, of course, Lucasfilm here in the United States. And then the final episode, Owl Song, was Triggerfish Animation, which is in South Africa. And one of the things that I thought was really special as I went through and watched these 9 episodes is across every single culture, you could pick up cultural elements and it all still naturally fit within the framework of Star Wars. It helps paint a picture of a big galaxy, which we know that galaxies truly are. It is really neat that we get these different cultures applied to Star Wars, and it gives us the ability to kind of feel and see how big the galaxy really is.
Yeah, and you had the opportunity to ask James Waugh about the cultural impact of 9 different studios. Let's hear from James.
Visions Volume 1 was amazing. We all loved it. And it exposed so many people to anime like me who really, I just kind of had a general knowledge of anime, but it exposed me to, more than just the one style that you kind of see, popularly. Visions Volume 2, we've got styles from a wide variety of cultures, and you get to paint on such a, wider canvas. What do you think it is about Star Wars that, translates so well across all these different borders and cultures?
Well, I let me kind of break that into 2 parts. I would say the first part is I am really glad to hear that about Visions Volume 1, because I think we always believed that, we could bring Star Wars fans to this animated medium that is really truly incredible. And the storytelling work is really incredible, and not everybody is engaging with it. And so I think we feel very similar with Volume 2, whereas people that work in the animation industry and people who are thrilled about just storytelling in general and filmmaking out there, we're aware of a lot of these studios, but not everybody is. And so hopefully Star Wars can be a platform to get eyes on some of the great storytelling that's happening out there. When we talk to all these different creators from different parts of the world, we tend to find them resonating with similar themes. And I think some of those themes are because they're the most human. So Star Wars at its core is storytelling about choosing, selflessness over being selfish, finding, your path, stepping out into the world and risking and finding your higher calling, finding the family that defines you. All of these things, no matter where you live in the world, are something that you relate to. You understand every single day we're faced with a choice that, is this the light side or the dark side? And that can be expressed in many different ways. And Absolutely. So I think it works, and it transcends culture, because all of these cultures, even if their mythic traditions look at those values from a different way, the core root of it is still kind of eternally human. And translates. So that's what we found, at least.
It's really interesting to see how the different cultures on Earth ended up interpreting a lot of the Star Wars stories. But one of the things that I found most interesting, and Nick, I'd love to hear from you on this as well, is to see stormtroopers and kyber crystals and space fighters and different alien races come to life in a voice from France or India or South Africa. It was still very, very Star Wars to me. And it pulls you right back into it. And you then, to me, you forget that this was made in India or this was made in Chile. It's a Star Wars story. And it really worked for me. How about you, Nick?
It totally worked for me. And I think that something's really interesting is how there's so much familiarity in these stories, even with cultures that I may not ultimately be that familiar with.
Right.
My favorite, The Bandits of Golock, is an Indian story. It's Indian culture is set throughout this animation. It's gorgeous, the music, all those things. I've never been to India. I know what I know about India from, TV and reading and those kinds of things. But to see it and to learn, little insights to these cultures, the familial nature of cultures, across these different countries. But also the thing that it does is it's so, as you said, it's so very Star Wars, and it has some very Star Warsy elements, and it does a really neat job of marrying our real world with, the elements of these stories are very real and personal. There's a lot of family, which is very Star Wars. Yeah. There's a lot of repression, which is repression and oppression, which is very Star Wars, but is also very real world. I saw several things in some of these stories, the Pit in particular. This group of people that are, basically being forced to be slaves for a big society, being hidden away and rescued and like all these things. And there's a lot of culture and current events in that, but it also does some really fun stuff with history. I mentioned a moment ago, the Spy Dancer, the French short from that studio. And it's so neat because that's what Star Wars does. Star Wars uses myth to retell those tales. And I think that's something that is really interesting in that is how that plays with the idea of canon, which we tend to talk way too much about in Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why, and one of the things you need to do when you come into Star Wars Visions is check all your canon at the door and be prepared for stories that are going to feel familiar, but you're not going to be able to tie it directly to a story you already know. And these are really taking advantage of telling stories within the Star Wars universe. And we had an opportunity to ask Josh Rhimes about how they manage canon in the Star Wars Vision stories. I was very curious about is because these stories aren't considered Star Wars canon necessarily. What are some of the guidelines for story development? Once, as you were saying, Jacqui, once you get that story, it's been pitched and you love the story. Are there certain guidelines, and what are they for the story creators to build within this world?
I mean, really, it's Jacqui makes the call. We see if they're interested and excited, and then it's just a discussion. And the main guideline is kind of what we've been talking about. Is do you have a Star Wars story that you want to tell through your specific cultural perspective? And if they do, then we talk further. I think one of the things we really encourage the studios, and they kind of naturally move to this anyway, is investing in investing in new characters, new planets, new droids, new creatures, and vehicles, and that stuff. But especially new characters and new character journeys, and really finding that humanity that we can all identify with. Like, I Am Your Mother, for example, is a good one. It's Magda, the director, pitched a story. She was, born in Poland and moved to the UK with her mom, who barely spoke English and felt very embarrassed in front of her friends. And the story came from that personal place without any Star Wars attached to it. And then when it was placed in a racing academy, it worked really well. And because of that, and because of the racing aspect and the humor, it's, you could bring in those Easter eggs, and you can bring in Wedge Antilles as a character that already exists in Star Wars, and get Dennis Lawson to voice them. And similarly in Volume 1, we had the band on Tatooine. We were able to bring in Jabba or Boba Fett. But mostly for us, it is really just the cultural perspective and having those new characters drive their own stories, which are most important to us.
So cool to get that perspective. I really enjoyed hearing that, because I mean, that's a question that I think anybody who's a modern day Star Wars fan always wonders,
Right.
how do they connect stories, and how do they make sure that they're how can they tell a story in this ever expanding, ever changing universe? So that's
Well,
really
and it's
interesting.
really, to me, it's very freeing to do, like you said, which is check your canon at the door.
Yeah.
And literally just come into it enjoying stories, not trying to figure out, where does this fit? Is this in between this thing and this thing? Like, we spend so much time and energy trying to figure out where things fit, and does this connect to this other thing, that sometimes it takes away from our ability to enjoy the thing we're watching. And that may be part of why I enjoy these as much as I do, or have this time, is because I literally just went, this is just fun Star Wars. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Everyone has an inner light.
Follow the light.
I always knew you were meant for bigger things.
What if you just keep going?
No need to fear. There are others like you here.
I saw it myself. She has special powers.
Can you get your porta potty off the starting line?
She's a total... Exactly. Don't be afraid. May the Force be with you.
It's showtime.
Whoa.
The storm is approaching.
I can fight them. I'm strong enough now.
No one is stronger than them.
We can beat them.
You there! Hold it!
We cannot choose where our calling takes us. Only whether or not to answer.
We're going to get into slight spoilers. If you don't want to know anything about the episodes before you watch them, this would be a good place maybe to check out. We're not going to give away the stories in full, but we do want to dig into a handful of things, like some of the Easter eggs we found, as well as Nick and I want to share what our individual favorite episodes were. So Nick, let's talk a little bit about some of the Easter eggs that we well, some we were told about because we knew they let us know who some of the voices are, but there were a couple of other little neat things that we picked up. Start us off with some of the voices that we might recognize.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts. And of course, as I'm prone to do, IMDb is my best friend. You know, most anytime I watch anything, whether it's the trivia, whether it's where do I know that guy from? A couple of the notable voices. And what I will say up front too, as a full disclosure, I am certain that in some of these episodes that are put on by these other countries, the voices that are in them are probably very well known there. I know that one of the leads in the Indian short is a very, very popular Indian actor who's won multiple versions of an Oscar. And, you know, so that's a big deal for that person to be involved. So the ones that stood out to me, of course, were the ones that I already knew. In Screecher's Reach, Angelica Houston is a voice in that. And we know Angelica Houston from a wide variety of things here in the United States.
She'll always be Morticia to me.
Correct. She is the modern Morticia Adams. In the I Am Your Mother, the Aardman short, the one and only Dennis Lawson, Wedge Antilles himself. As we talk about canon and as we talk about Easter eggs, we actually got Wedge in this episode voicing himself, or voicing his character.
I have to say, I didn't recognize his voice at all.
Yeah. Well, and all I could think about was, you know, that last shot in Rise of Skywalker, you know, nice flying, Lando.
Right.
You know, his little
maybe
cameo.
maybe you're right. Maybe it's because we haven't heard his voice that much.
Exactly. So of course it's great to see Dennis Lawson back in Journey to the Dark Head, which is a South Korean studio. We have Daniel Day Kim. If you have watched the rebooted Hawaii Five-0, or if you're a watcher of Lost back in the day, He is in this short. He's a great actor that's been in a bunch of different things. Also, and I think probably not surprisingly, the short that was a combination between Japan and the United States that Lucasfilm Animation worked on. The commander in that episode is voiced by Steve Blum, our friend who recently showed back up as Garazeb Aurelios in Mando season 3 from Rebels. Matthew Wood makes his triumphant return as always as a stormtrooper. Multiple stormtroopers. The thing I love about Matthew Wood is that he works in the sound department, but he has this whole other second career being battle droids and stormtroopers and
General Grievous.
And wasn't he the major domo in he was
he was Bib Fortuna, right?
He was Bib Fortuna's return. Yeah. So that's great. And then of course David Diggs.
Seconds.
Exactly. David Diggs from Hamilton is also in that short. And I saw just recently something in the news that he's got another something coming out soon that I didn't. Oh no, he's Sebastian the Crab in the new Little Mermaid.
Yeah,
the live action Little Mermaid. So it's great to see these familiar actors. We got a lot of that in Visions Volume 1 with familiar voices, people that even connected to Star Wars. In one of the episodes, Keon Young, who plays Commander Sato in Rebels, who's in Mr. Wu in Deadwood, he shows up in one of those episodes. We get a lot of that. So the voice acting, the voice talent is very, very impressive. The other thing, of course, that I love is just the sounds of Star Wars. Star Wars is so built around audio, and to get TIE fighters and lightsabers and little background, hums and beeps and buzzes. That
I think I heard more probe droid sound effects in these than anything else. I just kept picking that up.
Apparently, it's the most you will have heard until you start playing Jedi Survivor, because my understanding is there's a lot of probe droids in that game too.
Oh man. So sound effects for sure. There's of course a handful of lightsabers. It's one thing that I will say that I enjoyed more about this season of Visions than last season was, while there's certainly heavy-handed Jedi themes within most of them, it's not the only story they tell. Whereas I feel like it allows it to breathe. The Ardman story, which was the one that I was looking most forward to, didn't turn out to be my favorite, but I was looking most forward to it just because I felt like if you're going to take Shaun the Sheep and and bring that to Star Wars, how's that going to play out? And of course, it was the most lighthearted, I think, of all of them, and it was fun and it was entertaining. But I think the first Easter egg that I picked up, and I think it might be my favorite Easter egg, is in the episode Sith, the very first one. It's called Sith, right? The protagonist rides a wheeled bike thing that looks just like what General Grievous had.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, this is where we're going with this time around. That's going to be great. Were there any Easter eggs that in particular that you
there were a couple of them. One of them was in the Bandits of Golock, which was my favorite episode. There's a storm that's coming, and somebody says storm's coming, and I couldn't help but go to the old woman telling Annie, storm's coming, Annie.
Yep.
That may not have been intentional, but that's the kind of Star Wars nerd I am, that that one little phrase that sticks. I say it to my kids all the time.
And that I think we say we don't know, but they put that in on purpose.
For sure. I will say, just to follow up on your point about kind of the influence in some of these canon things, there's a lot of Kyber crystal influence throughout these 9 episodes, but not exclusively at the cost of having to be in a lightsaber, which I thought turned that expectation on its ear a little bit.
Yep, for sure.
The other thing that I felt almost like, not necessarily an Easter egg, but maybe a thread running through it, is, of course, there's a lot of family stuff, which is very Star Wars, as we've said.
Yep.
But also, there's almost like an underlying broom boy thread running through this with normal people and being force sensitive, and, quote unquote normal people who haven't found their abilities yet, people who are living isolated in this big galaxy, and the Jedi may still be a rumor. The Sith may be a scary story told around a campfire. But that was something else that stood out to me a little bit, was just kind of a modern, we are all the Jedi kind of vibe.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The other thing that I would add to that is that I also felt like there was a little bit more heavy-handed reminder of how evil the Empire is.
Yes.
Which feels like something that Star Wars has been doing over the last couple of years. as far back, of course, as Rogue One, but more recently in Andor, and just the way the Empire is being portrayed, even in The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, we're seeing that the Empire and its remnants, the people who are part of the Empire, are just not good people, and
very clear good guy, bad guy lines being
right.
What
makes a couple of the episodes, again, without going into spoilers, there's a couple episodes where when there's reveals about who these people are, it hits a little bit differently, which I think is great. I think I've said it before, we spent so much time back in the way Star Wars was in the 70s, where it was a very simple rebels are good guys, Empire is bad guys, and now it's those that decide to be in the fascist empire are really bad people. Yes. But the rebels have to do things that aren't great. I mean, even in in the Stars episode, the choice they have to make to try to escape the empire leads to not exactly the way they would want to have done it. So, and I think that's really great about the way the stories are being told. And I think, and then we'll talk in a moment about what our favorite episodes were. I think what it's doing is it's creating some pretty heavy stories. And of course, I haven't been able to show my son yet because he wouldn't. Never mind. Yes, there's the NDA. I had to watch it on my screen with my email address plastered all over it. I don't think he could sit in front of a laptop and watch these. But I'm really curious to get his take on these stories, because I think they're going to be more appealing to him because they're not straight anime. They're going to be more accessible sort of animation, but I'm curious how the stories are going to hit him, because again, the Aardman one, I think the what's the South Africa, something's, I'm screwing up the names.
Our Song.
Our Song. I think those are easier for younger kids to get a hold of, but I think the action and the stories are pretty deep in the other ones. Speaking of deep stories, Nick, what was your favorite episode?
My favorite episode was the Bandits of Golock. I've said that a couple times throughout this episode, just because it's hard not to reference it. And honestly, even as we are going through, we're talking about these, I'm looking at my list that I've got on my screen up here to use as a guide. And I'm already going, I need to rewatch that one. I really need to rewatch all of them. And I think I've watched all of them twice so far. But the more I think about them, the more it just makes me enjoy and want to go back and check them out again. But my favorite was Bandits of Golock. It was from 88 Picture Studio in India. And without giving too much away, it's no surprise that in fact, I think you told me you knew this was going to be my favorite. There's a lot of Indiana Jones vibes in this. It actually has, there's a train chase situation, which felt very Last Crusade with young Indy on the circus train. It's, when it's in India, of course, you get a little bit of Temple of Doom vibes, just, culturally speaking. But I just love this story. It's a brother and a sister, out in the world trying to survive, getting into some trouble, being rescued in a way that, as we say, light spoilers, getting rescued in an unexpected way. But at the same time, as you're watching a Star Wars Visions, there's a little part of you that's like, that's not entirely unexpected. But it was just very heartfelt. And I love, so much of Star Wars is parent-child stories. Usually it's a father and a kid, Han and Ben, Luke and Anakin, Leia. Not as many sibling stories throughout Star Wars. And so it's always sweet to see a sibling story, siblings working together, helping each other out, a little bit of mischief, and then you get a good bad guy. I mean, this to me was a very good, basically almost literally mustache twirly, bad guy. And he was kind of like a green Thrawn in a way. He had green skin and red eyes, not blue skin. So it was a lot of fun. And it really did, like I said, something about the music, this kind of city when they get into the town. It just, and again, the aliens, you see the little aliens in the background, little kind of Easter eggs of, I know what that alien is. I know, there's a big, that guy, or, a Ninth Sister alien, or, whoever it is. So that was my favorite, and it was a lot of fun. And like I said, of course, it gave me a lot of Indiana Jones vibes, which spoke to me, certainly. But it was a fun story, and I love the reveals anytime, you have those pop up in these episodes.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned was the brother-sister relationship, which was, it was it was really well done. And the animation style, it was as close to live action in animation style of all of them. And that's another thing about this particular season of Visions. Multiple times when the episodes ended, I was feeling a tear falling in my ear, in my eye, and I was like, "Oh man, this worked." And this was definitely one of them as well. And it's because they were able to build. And what strikes me too is the longest episode is 18 minutes. Most of them are 15, and they tell an entire movie in every single one of these episodes. I would love
Not
to
a
see
wasted frame.
100% right. It's the Dave Filoni school of not a wasted frame. But I think that's the beauty of animation studios. They get it. They know how to tell a story in a very compressed amount of time. And yes, I would love to see a full 2-hour version of this particular episode. And I think they could do it.
Cool. What about you? I know you had a favorite as well.
I did, and I think the only way to talk about it might be to give some pretty heavy spoilers. So I will do my best, but you may get spoiled if you're listening here to one of the episodes. My favorite one, and I'm surprised. I expected to have it displaced every time, but it didn't, and which is why I'm confident to go back and say this is my favorite. It's the Screechers Reach episode, which was done by Cartoon Studio out of Ireland. It's a style, and maybe the reason I liked the style was because very much like I used to do some work for Plenty Animation Studio in New Jersey. I say some work. I did like background cells and some cell painting and stuff. So I didn't do a lot, but that kind of, it's classic hand-drawn style.
Right.
With 3 human kids and a little alien, which we've never seen before. And the story is of they work in this mine, which at first you're not sure if it's an Imperial mine, but then you hear the probe droids go by and it's an Imperial mine, and then you see some walker type things. And it's their opportunity to make a break. And you're not even sure if they're trying to escape for good, but they want to get out and go to this place called Screechers Reach. The girl lead, Doll, said, her name is Doll, says we're going to go to Screechers Reach, and it's a ghost story. And again, a very different kind of thing for Star Wars. There were literally moments that gave me jump scares. It was the characters were cute at first, and then they were put in these very perilous situations, or Doll was put in some very perilous situations. There's jump scares. It's called Screechers Reach because there's some like really disturbing screeching you hear. And then when it ends, okay, total spoilers here. I'm sorry, I have to do it. If you want, I'll just skip ahead 2 minutes in this. But at the end, Doll is faced with a decision because she murders this screeching thing in the in Screechers Reach.
If you looked up the word crone in the dictionary, it would be the character that she took out.
100%. And she did it with a red bladed lightsaber, which belonged to the crone. And then you think, okay, she beat it. They're going to go back and she's going to keep this lightsaber. And where's her story going to go? But out of the sky comes a really interesting looking starship. And out comes Angelica Houston's character, which at first you think might be very motherly. You don't know what to think of her. And then you recognize those Sith eyes she has. And she has been chosen. Doll, our lead character, has been chosen to be her Sith apprentice. And she makes a decision. You would think, okay, it's an animated show. She's going to make the decision and just go back with her friends. But she doesn't. No, she abandons her friends to go with the Sith Lord. And my gosh, it was so, again, heart-wrenching in a way, but not in a tearful way. Wow, that was really heavy. And that's, again, one of those stories. There's a handful of stories throughout Visions where you're like, okay, I need part 2 of this story. I need the next part of this story. But again, it's hand-drawn animation. It's the most cartoony, I think, maybe of all of them. But for me, it's the story that I've thought about the most since watching, which I guess is, sort of your key indicator that it worked. And so, but again, it's that ability to tell a story that you care so much about that when it ends, you feel fulfilled from a story perspective. You want more of it, and you can't stop thinking about it. And I think that's the way I would describe almost every single one of these episodes. Is when they end, you feel like you just watched a 2-hour movie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's something that's so neat is, as you mentioned, it's almost the exact perfect balance. And it's something that we talk about in Star Wars all the time, balance, to have short episodes that end and feel completed, but also leave you going, I could see the whole rest of that story. I could see more coming. There's also, like you talked about, the elements of design, the elements of the animation are so appealing. And those are one of the things that suck you in. I think it's brilliant that the episode Sith is the first episode that, if you're going in order, because it's visually stunning. It's about an artist. Yeah. It's a former Sith who is an artist living in isolation by herself with a cool droid, with the General Grievous motorcycle. But it's like, as a kid, when you made splatter paintings, it's like if your splatter painting was a Sith master, and it sucks you in from the beginning because it's visually stunning and gets your attention. And then you go from there and to these other, like I said, not only the cultural elements, but the cultural animation aspects of it. The stop motion, the claymation, the Spy Dancer that I talked about before it also has a very cartoony vibe, but it's a cartoony vibe in a different way than what you're talking about with Screecher's Reach. Right. It's almost, it's hard to describe. It's almost like a 20s comic book in a sense.
Yep.
It has stormtroopers, but these are very stylized stormtrooper helmets that don't look like what we think a stormtrooper because it's a different style. It's stylistically changed, and it's another way to keep you from getting bored, as if the stories weren't good enough. Right. Visually, you get something different each time. And maybe that's a little bit of why it appealed to me, or it's grabbed me more than Visions Volume 1 did. Not that I dislike Volume 1 in any way.
Right.
And those styles did change, but there was more, I'd say 75% of the ones in Volume 1 hewed to a much closer path animation stylistically than these do. Every single one of these is different.
Yep. And in fact, I found that after the first two, when I recognized that this was going to be a very different style, and I kind of knew it just based on what we had been told. But not only did I want to see what the story was going to be, I wanted to see what it was going to look like and how they were going to tell it. So, so Nick, overall, we talked about Volume 1 a little bit and how this is different in Volume 2. How would you summarize? What would you tell somebody about Visions Volume 2?
I don't think if I was coming into it, let's say I was going to call my dad tomorrow and say, hey, here's the thing you should watch. I don't know that I'd mention the word animation. I don't know that I'd mention necessarily the existence of Volume 1, not because it's not deserving of merit in any way. It absolutely is. But if I was telling somebody, hey, do you want 9 fun bite-sized Star Wars stories to watch? You should check this out. Here's what's neat about them. They come from 9 different studios in 9 different countries, and they each tell Star Wars from a unique perspective that doesn't require you to have any pre-knowledge going into those stories. If you know good and bad, if you know what a lightsaber is, if you know what a kyber crystal is, you're set. It's a great, fun way to, enjoy some, like I said, bite-sized Star Wars.
Yep. And I would add to that, as you said, I don't know that I would mention Volume 1 because I think, for better or worse, anime is it's a very specific style. And if you're not, I know a lot of people who didn't watch Volume 1 just because they're like, anime's not for me. But if you want various style stories told in various styles, you can't go wrong with this. I can't encourage people enough to see this. If you are a fan of the Star Wars universe, if you want to get new stories that allow you to check the canon at the door, as we said earlier, that allow you to just go in, have no idea where they're going, and just have fun in the Star Wars universe, this is absolutely the thing for you. And so I highly recommend.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this on the day before, as soon as it hits tonight, you're going to want to check it out. If you are checking this out and thinking about going to see it, stop thinking about seeing it. Go over to Disney Plus right now and check it out. We'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Star Wars Visions Volume 2? If you're watching on our YouTube channel, please leave a comment below. And if you're listening, share this episode on wherever you are on social media and tag us at the SSW Network and let us know what you think. Do you agree with us? Are we wildly wrong on this? What was your favorite episode of Star Wars Visions Volume 2? And would you recommend it to a Star Wars friend or just a friend who likes good stories? Nick, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It was great being able to speak to our Lucasfilm friends with you. That was an honor and a privilege. I want to thank our friends at Lucasfilm for giving us this great opportunity.
Yes.
And Nick, may the Force be with you.
Always.